Hello, and welcome to another edition of Public Affairs Public Access. I'm your host, David Hutzelman, and this is a show where we talk about political philosophy, public policy, a little politics and all, mainly from a libertarian perspective. And, you know, I'm always asked, what in the world's a libertarian perspective anyway? And I just try to give a little encapsulation that libertarians are folks that are generally interested in a free market economy, not the over-regulated crony capitalist system that we have at work in the United States today. We're very socially tolerant and have a live and let live philosophy about your personal lifestyle and what you choose to do in the privacy of your own relationships, but also we're very strong advocates for free speech, which is a typically hot topic on colleges today. So that's where we come down on those two issues. And from a foreign policy standpoint, we're generally non-interventionists. We don't think we can go out and conquer a lot of other companies to make them see the American way of life, and that we need to be a little more humble in terms of trying to arrange affairs for other people around the world, and generally to stay out of their internecine religious conflicts that never seem to end and never come up with anything beneficial for us as a third-party participant. So anyway, tonight I have a couple of outstanding gentlemen to talk with us this evening. I have excuse me, one of the regulars on my show is Charles Blaine here on my left. Charles is currently working with his Houston regional representative for Empower Texans. He's a political science graduate from Farley Dickinson in New Jersey, right? In Jersey. Right. And our other guest is James Quintero. James is the head of the local governance group at Texas Public Policy Foundation. And he has degrees from Ohio State and from Texas State as well?
University of Texas and Texas State.
Yeah, those two. So I'll let James start. We do have a phone. Anybody that wants to call in and ask either of these extremely well-qualified gentlemen the question, I will just deflect any questions you give to me to one of them so that you won't put me on the spot. But nonetheless, there is going to be a phone number on your screen, and you can call in and ask us at any time. I'll try to interrupt one of the speakers when it's appropriate, and they can answer that. But let me turn it over to James for a minute and let him. I think he's the first guest I've had from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, so I'll give him a chance to do a little plug for TPPF and as well for the the local governance area where James is currently the lead position there. So James, give us a rundown.
Sure, David, Charles, good to be with you. Good to be here in Houston, away from.
Yeah, you're a native, right? Do I understand?
I am. I was raised out there off of 290 and Jones, so.
Oh yeah. Okay.
It's good to be back home. As far as the Texas Public Policy Foundation goes, we are the largest state-based think tank in the nation. And of course, we help guide public policy in the most important state. So I feel very privileged to be at the foundation now 10 years this month, helping to lead and craft its public policy as it regards to local governments. And so we try to take the conservative message of low taxes, limited government, and sound public policy down to our cities, our counties, our school districts, and our special districts. As I like to joke with my colleagues, it is good job security. So there are several thousand local governments throughout Texas, and not all of them operate on a conservative mindset. And so we've had a lot of fun and success over the last 5 years that I've helped lead this team. And I think our most recently concluded legislative session is by far the most successful. I think we are not only changing the narrative when it comes to how we think about local governments, but also we're changing policy. And so it's been really fun to see this initiative grow and develop into something that's it's becoming influential at the Capitol.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I know both of you gentlemen are do a lot of your work in Austin, and you're basically looking at the legislative process at the state level, which makes me wonder, you know, to what extent have you come to grips with the fact that that while you're working at the state level, there's also a lot of spillover effects at local government? And of course, we've all heard, you know, the closer your government is to you, the better it's got to be. So, and yet here you are at the state level trying to maybe oversee or have a critical eye on what some of the local governments are doing. So, Charles, how do you reconcile that? Are you a local guy or a state guy?
I'm definitely a local guy, and I do rely on people like James, you know, to kind of help bridge that gap, if you will. Like, I'm based here in Houston. I focus on Houston City Council, Harris County Commissioners Court, HISD, other entities that are here within, you know, our local region, and my primary focus is here, and, you know, secondary focus being the legislature and how those two interact. And I do rely on like the Center for Local Governance, because they do provide a lot of that insight, and I think they do push a lot of the issues that we've seen, kind of even just this last legislative session. They push a lot of the issues forward, whether it be pension reform or anything under the sun that has to deal with our local governments and how the state legislature oversees those. So I think I was telling you before that my first weekend in Power Texans, I've been with them for about going on 4 years now. I started, and I think it was my second day, and they were like, "You need to go speak to James Quintero at TPPF," and they were like, "You just need to sit down with him and listen to him." So we went and got tacos. I think it was me, you, Ross, and another one of your colleagues. I can't recall who else, but we went and got tacos and kind of just talked about local government, and he kind of guided me a little bit on what to focus here in Houston on, and I've done that ever since. So I think it's you've got to kind of find this happy medium in between. I mean, you know, you hear in City Hall often that they want local control, and yeah, they think they should have complete autonomy and stuff, but we've seen what happens when that's given to them, or when they take it, rather. So it's really helpful to have kind of a counterpart, if you will, in Austin, pushing a lot of the stuff that we see here, and making sure that our local governments are kind of reined in and under control.
Very good. I'm wondering, James, in terms of when you guys look at, when TPPF looks at what's going on in the local government scene, what's kind of the guiding principle that governs whether you're going to get involved in it or want to get involved in it, or think that, you know, if there's a reason to get involved in it? What's that overall philosophy that you have in the local governments thing about when it is that it's right for the state to kind of interject itself into local affairs? Well,
so kind of stepping back for a moment, one of the catalysts for the launch of my team was that we took a look at what was happening across the landscape, and we saw that we had a very conservative state legislature that was enacting good public policies. It was cutting taxes, it was balancing the budget, it was reining in spending where needed. But a lot of those fiscal policies were being counteracted at the local level by excessive property taxes, very high debt, lots of pension obligations. And so I think senior staff at the foundation recognized that we needed to have a presence at the local level that was communicating some of the conservative alternatives. And so that was kind of the catalyst. And one of the things that we recognized right out of the gate was that a paradigm had formed around local control. And so oftentimes what would happen at the legislature is you would have various special interest groups representing cities, counties, school boards, and whatnot, who were very influential, had never really been challenged in a meaningful way by conservatives at the Capitol. And so they were dominating the landscape, and they had a lot of sway, and one of their primary justifications for getting their way was the unfettered use of local control. And so
Yeah,
this,
a lot of the times, that even with local control, when they couldn't get something that they thought was good legislation for whatever, for their group, they could circumvent the local people and go to the state and get something passed at the state level, which was in many ways sometimes counter to their actual constituents.
that's absolutely true. And so one of the ways that we kind of try to help put things in a more proper perspective is by examining the issue of local control and pointing out very simply that local control, while it's oftentimes used as a justification for the enactment of policy or for the, for killing certain ideas, really local control is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It should not be the end in and of itself. What ought to be the end of policymaking is the preservation and the promotion of life, liberty, and property rights. For us at the Foundation, life, liberty, and property rights is the reason for government's existence. And so to the extent that local control can facilitate the accomplishment of those ends, then it's something to be celebrated and something to be used. But to the extent that it's used to impose very high property taxes, to continue this local government debt addiction that we have, or to facilitate other bad policies, then we wanted to take a stand and say, listen, this is not the right way to go. There's a better approach. And so, it's been an interesting experience, and this is only after really 2 sessions now. We've really shifted the conversation from local control to a paradigm of local liberty. And so I've been very pleased to see state legislators get it. I mean, almost immediately they get it. And they are increasingly leaning towards local liberty as the lens through which they're viewing policy instead of just simply local control.
That's obviously a good development. Well, I guess there's some kind of corollaries to our national system of governance when we have things like the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, which didn't allow states to set up tariffs and other things compared to with goods coming in from further states. And maybe I see some of that playing out with the transportation regulations that you all have been trying to, I guess, coalesce or try to make uniform across the state so economic players can, freely operate in Texas without trying to set up a separate company to do business in each county.
Yes. So one of the big wins that we saw last year during the regular session is the legislature unified behind a ride-sharing proposal that effectively preempts all of the onerous local regulations that were in place. And so in places like Austin, Uber and Lyft had actually left the city because the regulations that were enacted by city council were so onerous that it was difficult for them to make a profit. And of course, a lot of this had been initiated by the taxi cab companies who had ingratiated themselves with the city councils. And so Austin was not unique in that situation. There were a lot of cities, a lot of the major urban areas were being influenced by the taxi cab companies in installing these very harsh regulatory schemes. And so one of the things that conservative legislators did last session was enact a uniform and a low level of regulation that applies statewide. And I think that's been very much to the benefit of consumers, businesses, and the economy.
Yeah, is Uber now operating in basically all the major metropolitan areas in the state, as far as you know?
Yes.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is that, during the debate, you often had a lot of leaders in these cities, typically on the left side of the spectrum, arguing that conservatives often say they support local control, but yet now they want some sort of overarching state policy. And it's like, well, when your control is simply that, just to control this issue and not to, enhance liberty or to, increase competitiveness in the market, well, yeah, the state needs to step in. I mean, when, with Houston's regulations, we saw Lyft leave. Luckily, Uber stayed during that time period, but their regulations were more stringent than, Uber's regulations were more comprehensive than what the city was offering, except the city just wanted additional things that just kind of made it more difficult to operate, but didn't make the consumers more safe. So it was just kind of unnecessary, and you saw a lot of that argument back and forth over whether conservatives support local control or not. But I think it goes back to James's original point that, you know, it really is local liberty. That's what we're talking about. I mean, when they say local control, they're literally talking about just the control over the aspect.
Right.
Yeah, so it was definitely an interesting fight for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So, I don't, just an aside, I happen to be reading an article about Uber. Do you have any idea how many Uber drivers there are in the world now?
I do not know.
960,000.
Wow.
Wow.
Uber drivers. Is that incredible? I mean, that just blew me away. I couldn't believe that.
And see, if we didn't step in and take those regulations from the cities, there would probably be less.
Yeah, it could well be. So, I don't know. I haven't been following that. Are other states following along with that, do you know? Or is that something that Texas is kind of at the leading edge of that, of trying to do that uniform regulation?
Well,
I mean, it was the same thing that saved the country from, you know, the Commerce Clause that said, you know, we can't be spending all our time regulating each other. We need to just have free trade amongst the states. So
you're starting to see this preemption conversation erupt in a lot of different states, particularly those with Republican state houses. And I think, and this is just a conjecture, but I think what's happened is that because conservatives have effectively taken the federal offices off the table, in states like Texas, we've captured the state legislatures. Really, a lot of the liberal energy and momentum has kind of filtered down to the local level, and that's where you're seeing a lot of these kind of progressive policies pop up that really, you know, don't deserve to be enacted. And so a lot of states, including Texas, are engaging in preemption to push back against a lot of these big government policies that are being installed. And so, you know, one of the latest trends, and this is happening here in Austin, is Austin has recently enacted a paid sick leave ordinance.
oh yeah, I know that's gotten into the, yeah.
And so that particular idea originated out of...
That's just for employers in the Austin area.
Yes.
They,
now the mechanics are still a little bit uncertain. You know, it's to be seen how they deal with things like telecommuting or people who just happen to be working, you know, a little bit in Austin. And so, but that aside, I think that paid sick leave ordinance is going to be a major policy battle at the legislature. And I know conservatives in both the House and the Senate have already expressed their intent to file legislation next session to preempt that particular policy. And I think based on the experiences at places like San Francisco, Seattle, Washington, D.C., we have a good pool of evidence to pull from and say, listen, if we allow Austin and presumably other major cities to follow through with this kind of policy, these are the economic harms that are going to occur based on others' experiences. And so, you know, we're getting ready. We're going to gear up. That'll probably be a major preemption battle in 2019. I'm looking forward to taking part in that.
really basic, going back to the basis of what's the basis of a employment agreement with someone anyway, and what is the state doing in the middle of trying to engineer that agreement to begin with. So it's, again, a local liberty kind of an issue, not a, oh yeah, this is not necessarily good economic policy, but it has to do with the rights of people to actually take the kind of jobs they want and not close down a lot of activities for them.
And David, I want to make sure that your viewers don't think that I'm necessarily just blowing smoke when I say that conservatives are winning the day when it comes to local liberty. This is something that my ideological opposite, the Texas Municipal League, had to say in one of their newsletters released last year. And here it is, word for word. If 2015 was the year that local control began to lose its luster as a governing principle among some state leaders, then the 2017 legislative session saw the culmination of this unfortunate trend. The new improved mantra at the Capitol is liberty. And so, for once, I agree with the Texas Municipal League.
That's, well, have any issues, local issues, come up where you would feel it appropriate to take the side of the local
Sure.
government as opposed to the state.
So here's an interesting wrinkle, and I think this kind of exposes some of the hypocrisy that's occurring at the local level. One of the biggest items in pretty much any city budget that you'll see are paying for pensions.
Yeah.
Pension programs are a massive cost, and so what I think is interesting is at least in all of your major urban areas, they have effectively installed their pension programs in state statute. So they have deferred to the state on one of the biggest cost drivers within their budget. And so whenever we have discussions at the Capitol about pension reform, one of the things that I often say is, well, let's give cities back the ability to have oversight over their pension systems. And I have yet to find a single mayor of a major city who says, yes, James, that is a good idea. Mm-hmm. The fact is they don't want control and oversight over that because it gives them an easy out. If they were entangled in the mess that has become municipal pension programs, then they would have a lot of political headaches occur. And so, you know, there's a... You know, when this local control conversation always comes up during a legislative session, it's very evident that they want local control on some things, but not local control on other things. And so it's a bit of a hypocrisy that I find distasteful.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, I mean, as much as our mayor, Sylvester Turner, was involved in the entire pension negotiation and pension battle in Austin, whenever he gets the opportunity now that there's kind of this breakdown in communication between our fire department and the mayor's office, he often says, you know, well, I didn't have any involvement in the pension deal. That was just, you know, that was Austin. You know, our hands are tied. And that's the saying they love to say, our hands are tied, our hands are tied, our hands are tied. But, you know, as hard as they advocated for pension reform, they could have advocated to bring that back to be controlled within City Hall, and they didn't do that. And I think if that was pushed, they would probably oppose it. But yeah, no, I mean, it's ridiculous the amount that he was involved in it to now say that, you know, our hands are tied and we can't really have a say in it. It's a great way for our urban mayors to just kind of push the blame off to someone else and kind of kick the can down the road and say that they can't do anything without the legislature.
So here's another big battle that's getting ready to erupt, and that's of course on property taxes. Property taxes are very high, pretty much anywhere you go in the state, and if you look at some of the recent polling data, you can see
especially with all the people moving in, the real estate market booming.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, if you don't have to pass a tax increase, you just get your
Right.
property valued up, and your taxes go up automatically.
Well, and that's one of the shell games that local officials like to play, is that because values are appreciating at such an incredible rate, they don't have to raise the rate.
Or they'll say, oh, we lowered the rate by 0.1 mils last year. See, I'm voting. I'm behind you.
Yeah.
I voted for a property tax cut.
Hey,
right?
I voted for property tax reform. Right.
And so, you know, I've looked at some of the recent data. In fact, the Texas Controller has new numbers out about the 2016 property tax levy. You look at all of the taxes imposed by cities, counties, school districts, and special districts. It totals $56 billion. On a per capita basis, that's about $2,000 per person. For a family of four, that's $8,000. We're talking about enormous amounts of money. Mm-hmm. And of course, having a very high property tax burden has a lot of economic consequences. It prevents people from buying their first homes, oftentimes. It pushes a lot of your urban core out into the suburbs. It disincentivizes people from improving their homes and their businesses. I mean, there's all kinds of different economic entanglements. And so one of the things that we're going to be mounting a very strong case for is a property tax trigger. Now, oftentimes it's been mischaracterized as a cap. It is absolutely not a cap. What we're going to do is say local governments, cities, counties, and school districts, you guys can have, your property tax revenues can grow by X amount. I think right now the amount being floated out there is 2.5%. If you want,
Not going to be tied to like inflation plus population growth, maybe, or
there's a possibility for that. But I think for the sake of simplicity,
yeah.
having a low and uniform measure across the board that says you guys can have this much more, but if you want in excess of that amount, then you got to go ask for permission.
Yeah.
And so, of course, all of your associations and lobby groups are going to fight us on this, but I'm really confident, especially after the last legislative session, we got a good bill out of the Senate and a decent bill out of the House. I think people are beginning to recognize that something needs to be done on property taxes. And this is a good first step to really giving homeowners and businesses relief. So I would look forward to that conversation. And of course, your local officials are going to cry foul on the local control issue.
Yeah, sure.
One of the things that I'm looking forward to reminding them is that the ultimate form of local control is self-governance. And if we want to really move forward on local control, let's empower voters with the ability to decide on raising taxes in excessive amounts.
Sure. And of course in Houston, then you also have the shell game that they're playing with TERSs and tax reinvestment zones, so they try to get out from under any kind of control or cap. But even the cap legislation the cap charter amendments that have been passed in Houston, they allow for the fact that if you can go to voters and make the case that there's some unusual event. I mean, Harvey was one of the ones that they had thought that they might use, that we can, break the cap. That hadn't happened, and they haven't voted to do that. But there are several revenue cap cases that are moving up through the court system in Texas that I think may well come back to bite Houston in a pretty severe way before it's all over. So property taxes are not an issue that's going away, that's for sure. And I'm certainly.
Yeah. And I do want to stress James's point that it really, as much as we've called the Houston property tax cap a cap, it is a trigger. And if the city, if the mayor and city council want to collect taxes above and beyond the 4.5% or population inflation, they can ask for that. And they've often said, again, it's their favorite phrase, my hands are tied, I can't do anything, you've tied my hands. They can ask for more, and they've often said that. So, I'd love to see that kind of statewide to really kind of put a clamp down on these municipalities and force them to ask voters for that increase, because if you're gonna increase it, you should have to justify it. It makes no sense. The number you said, what, 56 billion? That's startling. I mean, that's unbelievable. And they don't consider how much that does really just dampen everything else and limit how much Texans can do with their own money. And having Texans having their money is the best bet for how they can spend it. I mean, I'd rather spend my money or anybody else spend their money than government spend it. So that's going to be exciting next session for sure.
If you look at what's interesting to me is I'm a kind of a data nerd, and so I like to look at trends. And one of the things that the Texas Comptroller's biennial property tax report has is kind of a 20-year breakdown of the increase in the property tax levy. So if you go back, and they have this in their latest report, it's kind of towards the back. If you go back and look at the increase from, I think it's right around 1995 to 2015, so a 20-year block of time, what you'll notice is that the average annual increase in the levy across the board for every type of local government is about 6%. Now that means that your property tax bill is growing at 6% every single year, regardless of major recessions, regardless of...
That'll double in what, 10 years then at 6%?
It's a pretty quick, yeah, it's very quick. And so these bills are growing much, much faster than people's ability to afford them. And it's really no wonder why, again, kind of looking at the polling data, before every session, the Texas Tribune usually does a pretty good job of publishing some good data. What they have found is that left, right, and middle all agree property taxes are very high, and the legislature needs to take action to really rein in a lot of these excesses.
So what, is it the Municipal League that stands in the way of doing a lot of that, James?
Thus far, they've thwarted me 2 times, but my third time is going to be I'm very confident about next session. I think we have a change in leadership in the House that's going to be favorable to an aggressive property tax reform bill. We have obviously good leadership in the Senate. Governor Abbott has already indicated he's willing to make this a top priority. I'm very confident that we're going to see meaningful action on property taxes next session.
Great, glad to hear that. And I know most of the issues that we've been talking about are issues that have quantifiable economic benefits, but isn't another issue that that y'all are looking into too is the bail issue, criminal bail issue? Is that something that local governance has put forward some proposals? I know TPF is big into, you know, right on crime and
oh, yeah.
things like that. But is bail another issue that needs to be synthesized across the state, or how does that work?
It's one of those. It's an interesting issue, and you know, we are fortunate to have a lot of criminal justice experts housed within the foundation who kind of contribute to our Right on Crime initiative, which has actually grown into a national outfit. And I believe we are opening an office in Washington, D.C. to help kind of push the criminal justice effort from a federal level as well. Now, at the local level, I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with all the details, but our team is pretty aggressively working on that issue. I don't know all of the specifics yet.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So it's not just economic regulation that y'all are in. Is there any news coming out of the plastic bag ban cases? And you want to say a few words about plastic
I do.
bags?
This is absolutely one of my favorite issues, and you know, in the local government sphere, it's the little stuff that I find really counts. And so what you have is a situation over the last maybe 10 years or so where a number of different municipalities, most of your major ones now, minus Dallas, have enacted either fees or prohibitions on the use of single-use plastic bags. And so these are grocery store bags. And of course, there's all kinds of environmental reasons that they cite for meddling in your business. But what we have long said, and I believe we've been talking about this particular issue for about 5 years now, is that setting aside any policy differences that we have on plastic bags, you know, we can debate about whether or not these are good or bad for the environment,
or how much energy it takes,
or how much energy, or
use to do them, or
absolutely
dispose of them, or whatever. Yeah.
Or whether they contribute to foodborne illnesses, which, by the way,
right.
PolitiFact dinged me on not too long ago. Let's set all of the policy issues aside and really focus what's at the core. What's the core problem with this? And that's the rule of law. So the state legislature has already told municipalities that they may not enact these types of bans and restrictions. And yet, because I think local governments are more susceptible to special interest groups, a lot of them have gone ahead and done it anyway. And they are effectively flouting state law. And so we've been supporting a case that has been moving up. It's the Laredo Merchants Association versus the City of Laredo, and they took it to the district court level. Unfortunately, lost there. Went to the appellate level, won a pretty decisive 2-1 victory there, and the case is right now in front of the Texas Supreme Court. And what the court is getting ready to decide is whether the black and white letter of the law says what we think it says, and that's that municipalities can't do this kind of policy, or whether there's some other kind of interpretation that you know, the cities are arguing is correct. And so the oral arguments for that case just happened maybe 4 to 6 weeks ago. I'm hopeful that the court will act quickly on this. If they do and they decide in our favor, then what you're going to see is the City of Laredo's bag ban go away. And then we're going to start having really serious conversations about whether that court case applies to all the rest. And I think it will. And then if it does, then hopefully Texans can get rid of this bag ban that is in pretty clear violation of state law.
While it's in a violation of state law, of course, it always brings up the question of, well, why is that a law anyway? Of course, the issue, I guess, is, plastic bags endanger the wildlife, they're a visual pollution, whatever. But on the other side of that, of course, there's already laws against littering. I mean, it's, I guess you'd have to view it as overreach to go over and say, well, you might litter with this, therefore we're not going to let you have one of these things. So that goes back to kind of gun control in a way. You can't own a gun because something bad might happen when you own it.
So one of the things that here's a question that I posed a group of panelists that I was sitting next to at South by Southwest not too long ago. I said, okay, guys, if we're going to ban plastic bags because these are a danger to the environment, what's next? Are we going to start banning plastic straws like California? Are we going to start banning children's toys? Are there other items? What's going to help further your cause more? And of course, no one could answer that because they're so singularly focused on plastic bags. But if you draw this out to its logical conclusion, then you invite local governments to really meddle in your life to no end.
Yeah. There is no clear defining line between what you can be trusted to do. You know, I mean, basically, the laws ought to limit you from doing something that harms your neighbors. And I mean, if you get over that hump, the fact that you might harm your neighbors by, we can preclude you from harming your neighbors, but you won't be able to throw a plastic bag on their front yard if we make it illegal for you to have plastic bags. So
yeah, it's the idea of like regulating behavior by banning something.
Yeah,
and we have so many different alternatives to regular grocery store plastic bags. I mean, so many things come in plastic bags that I can throw out my car window or something. So I mean, it's just where do you end once you start down that road? And that's the same thing for a lot of different things. I mean, whether you're talking about regulating, like we said before, ride sharing, or if it's Airbnb or whatever the case is, where do you end when you start opening the door to regulate these different industries or different things that we use? It's just you're opening kind of a Pandora's box.
Yeah. So sometimes there's a pretty clear line, I think, like with the fracking ban. I mean, if you presumably own the property rights under your property, it's not up for vote as to whether that's your property or not. Now, there may be some rules that have to do with how you develop it, but you can't prohibit somebody from owning their own mineral rights, which I guess is what the fracking ban was really going to do, is that you can't extract the mineral rights in a certain way that people found offensive.
It's a lot of these policy discussions, like the fracking ban, these are more reminiscent of places like California than they are Texas, and which Governor Abbott, I thought, did a really fine job when he called out the fact that, at least in the legislature, what we're trying to do is prevent the Californization of Texas. We want to preserve that unique, low-tax, limited government structure in Texas, both at the state level as well as the local level. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we're fighting so aggressively is, we're trying to maintain what we've long had.
How do you see that? What was it? Demographics? Was it politics? What's causing California to go over the edge that we want to avoid?
It is.
I mean, one thing they'll say is, oh, well, they have all those ballot initiatives all the time that you can get in and start monkeying with the laws themselves and subject them to popular vote. So what, you think that's a problem?
When I first started at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, I remember having a conversation with a colleague of mine, David Gunther, and David told me something that I'll never forget. He said, Texas is the way it is because we have a part-time legislature. Yeah. The minute that we veer from that path and go to a full-time legislature like California, that's when we're going to lose the Texas miracle. And so I think the fact that we have a part-time biennial structure is absolutely the key to our success. We don't have officials in Washington constantly looking for ways to justify their election and their ongoing campaigns. And so maintaining that limited government structure in Texas is paramount. And I think that's one of the areas where California falls short, is they of course have a full-time state legislature that is always looking for ways to monkey with people's lives.
Yeah, right.
And it has been an absolute disaster.
Interesting. Yeah. Although they have, I guess, relented on the medical and or recreational marijuana issues in California. That's they've stopped evidently trying to totally regulate that, which is obviously still pretty heavily regulated in Texas. So we'll see where that goes. What another one of the I guess the wins, was it a win, I guess, in the legislature on annexation, James? What?
We had probably our biggest policy victory of the legislative session with regard to this annexation issue. So for those of your viewers who don't know, what was happening frequently around a lot of your major urban centers is that people living right outside of a city within the extraterritorial jurisdiction were subject to involuntary annexation. So that means that the city government at any time could reach out, grab you, and make you a city taxpayer.
Happened to my, I had a beach house down in Galveston. They just zoomed out the west end and said, you're now part of the city of Galveston.
Yes, and of course, Kingwood's the other big example.
Yeah,
I mean, it was really egregious what city governments were doing, and what that meant for you as a homeowner if you were involuntarily annexed is you were immediately subjected to higher taxes. Down in San Antonio, it was a 22% tax increase automatically. You are subject to much tougher regulations.
And you weren't necessarily guaranteed of any services, actually.
That's exactly right. So what? And of course, cities would deny this, but what was frequently happening is they would go out there and poach these developed areas that wouldn't need any additional services per se, and they would do so to pad their budgets. And so one of the conversations that we were on the winning side of this last session was, we said, okay, guys, listen, we're not necessarily against annexation, but we are against involuntary annexation. If a city wants to annex an area, then that area ought to have an opportunity to vote. They ought to have some say in the democratic process and not have people simply impose taxes on them without any kind of representation.
Happened to me.
Yeah,
for sure.
And so that was, now our ideal was a statewide bill that said no city can do this. We got a pretty big partial win. Right now, what the law says is that if you're in a county with 500,000 population and above, then that a city within that county has to ask for permission to annex. For everybody else, they're not immediately covered, but what it does say is if voters in that county want to petition their county commissioner court to hold an election, and that election is successful on the question of whether or not they want to be subject to the provisions of SB 6, then they can. And so then...
Is this in terms of them wanting to be annexed, or this is as a revolt against not wanting to be annexed?
Yeah, so in fact, we're working with a group of homeowners and property owners up in Bell County right now, and using this avenue, what they're helping push forward is they want their county and all of the cities therein to be subject to this election requirement. And so these folks on their own are going out there and gathering signatures, and they're going to present to their county commissioners these signatures which are going to require that the county officials hold an election to say, does the county want to be subject to these provisions? Thumbs up, thumbs down, based on what they say, then if the election is successful, then all of the cities therein must, from there out, hold an election to see if their annexation is successful.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, Kingwood probably would have been a case that, in the Woodlands has somewhat long-term negotiations going with the city of Houston because they were being threatened to be annexed all along.
Here's one of the interesting wrinkles that emerged. So the new law went into effect December 1st. And in the run-up to that December 1st deadline, you saw a lot of cities out there who are going to be affected by the new law basically aggressively push through a lot of these forced annexations under the old system.
Yeah.
And so they went out and they captured a lot of people. And they made a lot of people mad. And what I'm hopeful for is that the foundation can tap into some of that energy that was generated and use it to re-examine the disannexation process. Because right now the disannexation process, to get disannexed, is very, very hard. The scales are definitely weighted in the favor of cities. And so we want to try and re-examine that issue and see if there isn't a fairer balance to be struck, especially with places like Kingwood. My goodness, these are clearly folks who did not want to be annexed. Is there a better way to let property owners in Kingwood and elsewhere have some more say as to what city they're in? So that's a conversation I hope emerges next session.
And what I love to see during the run-up to the bill's enactment was that, like you said, so many people got frustrated. I mean, it was the first time that I went to a Pearland City Council meeting when they were discussing how many plots of land they were going to forcefully annex before the bill it became enacted, and so many people showed up. I mean, city council meetings are usually so dead. You have like a handful of people there who just come every week because they like to listen to it, but so many people showed up. There was this kind of raw fervor there to fight back, and I'd love to see that captured and to use it, because I mean, even in McKinney, I mean, I know people turned out up there as well. It was just this anger about it, and I'd love to see that. I'd love to see more people angry at city council.
I was actually talking about, if you talk about local versus outside control in annexation, or just in terms of voting, it doesn't seem to me that there is any reason why I, as a property owner in 2 different counties, can't vote for the people in the county that's imposing all these taxes on me, like in Galveston. Now, obviously, I shouldn't be allowed to vote in the national and the Texas-wide races, in 2 different polling places. I'm not talking about that, but it seems to me like with the electronic information that's available now, they should be able to tell which areas of voting I should be able to, I should be able to vote in Galveston. We have a bunch of people down there that are, well, all the whole west end of Galveston, people don't live there, and so the people that run Galveston are just sucking that money in and they don't live down there, and they don't burden the school district, they don't burden the police department and everything. But it seems like there ought to be a reform available that, it's taxation without representation. That's what's happening to me in Galveston, at least. So it seems like we have enough information and data banks now to allow me to vote for the people that are putting taxes on me in Galveston without mucking up the process by which state and other national elections have place. So I've been trying to talk to the Institute for Justice about taking that on as a case, but I haven't had any success yet. But it does seem like it's it's got all the right, seems to me, have all the right arguments to be made. But
so, David, speaking of local litigation, I want to give our legal team at the foundation a plug. Increasingly what we've found is there are a lot of opportunities to sue local governments when they are in the wrong. And not surprisingly, we have found ourselves in contest with the city of Austin here more and more. And so we have a really sharp team with the Center for American Futures that that works with my team to really identify prime opportunities to advance the conservative cause in the courts. And one of the most interesting cases that we're working on right now involves short-term rentals.
Yeah, short-term, I know that's a big topic.
And so for those who might not know, Austin has imposed some really harsh regulations on short-term rental owners. And these have really hit people in the pocketbook. And in 2022, I believe they're going to shut down a segment of that population's ability to even operate. So Type 2 licenses will effectively go away. And what's been interesting is we've started to get into the ordinance and figure out the ins and outs, and this thing is so riddled with both logical flaws and an excessive abuse of government power. So one of the things that they've done within the ordinance is they've empowered their enforcement team with all of these very unconstitutional powers. And so, to
asset seizure.
Yeah. So within the ordinance as it's written, to check and make sure that the property owner is in compliance with the ordinance, they allow their code enforcers to go in and potentially search a property at any time, day or night. I mean, this is a clear violation of the Constitution.
Scary, yes.
They regulate your ability to stay up past 10 p.m. They tell you how many people you can congregate with outside. It's so riddled with absolutely big government excesses that this is one of the cases that I think we're absolutely going to be successful on.
Really? Okay, good.
So, using our local litigation outfit, we're able to, I think, have another avenue to achieve victories in the conservative realm.
Very good.
And it's exciting to hear that they're pushing back against that because, I mean, to see the extremes of how far some of these things can go. I was reading a couple articles a few months ago about New York City's enforcement of their Airbnb ordinance, and what they were trying to do was ensure that anybody who was using or renting out their apartment as an Airbnb wasn't doing it for longer-term rentals as hotels. So they were sending people undercover to these Airbnbs, pretending that they were checking in and looking for things like travel size shampoo and stuff like that the host may put out, and then they would report it back, and the NYPD or whatever task force they were using would show up and find the owner and stuff like that. So I mean, it can get so extreme that you really do need to push back. I mean, because they just will take whatever liberties they can get when they start running with it. So yeah, it's exciting to see people fighting back against that.
That's good. So that's a separate part of TPPF's organization, is that right?
Yes. So I've increasingly tried to drag our legal team into the local government realm. I've been successful. We also have another case ongoing against the city of Austin for its release time policies, which is it touches on the use of public money for private purposes, and it's
what's release time?
So release time is a practice used. It's pretty common throughout Texas local governments, where union officials will get compensated for union activities, and it comes at taxpayer expense. And so there's a provision in the Texas Constitution that basically says you can't use public money for private purposes.
Okay.
A very similar practice was struck down in Arizona, and it was actually championed by our sister institution, the Goldwater Institute.
Yeah.
And so I feel we're partnering with the Goldwater Institute on that particular issue, and really I think doing a pretty good job fighting back against that policy, and it could actually result in some fairly meaningful change if we're successful.
I noticed, or I seem to remember a couple of years ago, there was a case in Williamson County or something where they had prohibited taxpayer money from being used to lobby at the state level for the county, whatever they wanted to have done, but to pay people to go up and actually, in many cases, argue against the taxpayers in your city, so you can lobby in Austin get something done that you couldn't get done locally.
Yeah.
But I thought did they have some legislation that came out, or was it just the county that was able to stop that, or do you remember anything about that particular case?
So I know a little bit about it. I have a former colleague of mine, Peggy Venable, who was at the heart of that case. Peggy. And really what she was fighting against is this issue of taxpayer-funded lobbying.
Right.
You know, I'm often asked, James, if you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing you would change in Texas government? And immediately taxpayer-funded lobbying comes to mind. It is the single biggest threat to liberty because we are effectively paying money to lobby against ourselves. And you know, when I go up there to talk with legislators and try and push through good policy, all of my ideological opposites are taxpayer-funded associations. You know, you have the Texas Municipal League, Texas Association of Counties, Texas Association of School Boards. All of these entities get their funding from public sources in one way or another. And so, you know, what Peggy was pushing through in Williamson County was trying to hold the county to account because you're not supposed to be able to commingle those funds. So if I believe that the case had to do with the use of general revenue monies and some other dedicated funding. Okay. And so the court, I believe, ruled in Peggy's favor, but they ultimately allowed the practice to continue in Williamson County if the county would, you know, put forward some very specific guidelines. And so, you know, what ultimately needs to happen is legislative action that ends the practice. You would radically alter the landscape in Texas public policy.
Was that part of any of the ethics legislation that was being considered the last session? No,
but for your viewers, TPPF has a brand new initiative called the Texas Prosperity Promise. And
I signed that and sent it in.
Very good. I encourage all of your viewers to go to texasprosperitypromise.org and sign the document there. What it is, it's a compilation of all of our best and brightest ideas: eliminating the property tax, ending taxpayer-funded lobbying, school choice, and what these ideas were really unifying the conservative cause behind these set of core goals for the next legislative session, and trying to make headway, because if we can even just get half of those items accomplished, we will have done really good things.
Okay, well that's kind of end our conversation on an optimistic note there, and paving the way for a freer future. But I do want to thank both of you gentlemen for coming in here tonight and sharing your views with the audience and with myself, for that matter. So I always learn something when I have one of these shows. So that's the best part of it, and appreciate you being here. And maybe we can have you back and talk about some PPF victories in the coming years, and tell us how those things came about. And Charles, good to have you back on board in your journalistic endeavors. Look forward to reading about your issues in the magazine that you contribute to. So with that, I guess we can say goodbye to our audience for now, and hopefully we can I can continue a string of having such outstanding people on my show in the future, and we'll all be able to move liberty forward in Texas, hopefully.
Thank you, David.
Thanks you.
Thank you.